The Holy Grail War begins in Edo, Japan. Again, for what I think to be the 10th time? Anyways, the newest entry in Type Moon's Fate series, Fate Samurai Remnant, is an action RPG developed by Koei Tecmo's Omega Force division, who are most well known for their Warriors or Muso series. It's fitting, considering the setting, but at the same time, a bit strange that they asked the team most known for the Muso games to make a game for them, considering that Marvelous has already made the Fate Exceller series, a pretty decent Muso in its own right. That said, this game isn't really a Muso. I mean, it has the elements of one, but it also has enough in it to make it stand out. I remember when I first heard about this game, it was New Year's Eve and I was watching a hosted stream with my brother and his friends. When I first saw that teaser play, I won't lie, I was hooked. And now that I've pretty much played it to completion, I bring you a review, after all other major outlets have already done so. Still, there's quite a bit to unpack here, so I'll try to keep it as short as I can. One thing I should also note is that Fate Samurai Remnant is completely standalone, so you don't need any prior knowledge to the other Fate series, though it may make some references here and there. Also, there will be some light spoilers, but nothing too serious, and it's mainly for the things that have already been spoiled in promo material. And with that out of the way, let's begin. The story. Edo, Japan, 1651. It is a time of peace. You play as Miyamoto Iori, the adopted son of the famous Miyamoto Musashi, following in his father's footsteps in mastering the sword. One day, while working his rounds, Iori notices a strange wound on his hand. Thinking nothing of it, he decides to sleep it off. However, the peace would then be disturbed as Iori is attacked by the Mandarin from Iron Man Armored Adventures. Fighting off his pursuers, Iori is pushed to the edge, but before he can die, the wound on his hand acts up, and a mysterious warrior called Saber saves Iori and asks him if he is their master. This kickstarts Iori's journey as a master in the Holy Grail, Waxing Moon ritual, a hidden war between 7 different masters and their servants, famous heroic spirits, reincarnated and categorized into classes, summoned to assist their respective masters to fight to make their wish come true. In addition to the summoned servants, there are also extra masterless servants that have been summoned as well, called rogue servants. They don't really have much of a role in the story. Most of them anyways. They're mainly here just for cameo purposes. Throughout Iori and Saber's journey, they'll meet quite a cast of characters along the way, some of whom you may be familiar with, those who are given new looks and personalities, like Molly Tomomo and, actually, Emo John, and those completely new to the franchise, like this totally normal shopkeeper. I'll be honest, this game's story is pretty much just Edo Fate Stay Night, or Edo Fate Zero. If you're familiar with the franchise, then you might get the gist of how things will play out, but if you're new, then you might find yourself on an interesting ride. Gameplay. Since this is developed by Omega Force, there are some Muso elements within the game, but there are also some nuances that makes it different to their usual suspects. It's a lot more closer to an ARPG like Persona 5 Strikers or the Yakuza series, though ironically enough, Fate Samurai Remnant also reminds me a lot of Spirit of Sanada. The combat controls may take some time to get used to, but it kinda fits considering the story. Iori, as someone trying to master the way of the sword, becomes a better swordsman as he fights in the Waxing Moon ritual, and at the same time, you get a better grasp on the controls as you continue to play. At the bottom left of the screen, there's your health gauge and your valor gauge. To the left is the affinity gauge, which fills up to create a glowing orb, allowing you to use a certain technique. To the far left is the substitution gauge, which allows you to temporarily control the selected servant and fight as them. I'll go into further detail in just a bit. First, let's continue talking about the combat. Combo strings are similar to a Muso. Pressing the light attack button a bunch of times performs a combo, and you can perform different finishers by hitting the heavy attack button during a combo string. The Valor attack button allows Iori to perform a powerful screen clearing attack that wipes out smaller enemies and stuns larger ones. With servants, this activates their Noble Phantasm, which pretty much does the same thing, but a lot more stronger and has a flashier animation to go with it. There are also 2 context menus. Iori's on the left shoulder button, and servants are on the right. When opening these menus, the game will pause, giving you a breather if you need it. With Iori's context menu, you can perform different magecraft spells, such as throwing out fireballs or giving himself a buff by pressing the face buttons, which will need gems to perform them. Said gems can be picked up by defeating monsters. On the left side of this menu, you can change Iori's stance, each based on the teachings in Miyamoto Musashi's Book of Five Rings. Now, some of you may not be familiar with the Book of Five Rings. I'll admit, I did read it a couple years ago, but have completely forgotten everything about it, so I'll make it easier for everyone to follow. The first is the Way of the Earth, or Royal Guard, a traditional single-sword kenjutsu style that focuses on defense and is the most balanced. In this style, you have an auto guard meter that prevents damage for a few attacks, but once it runs out, it will need to be recharged. You can also unlock a block that allows you to perform active counters. The second is Way of the Water, or Trickster, a quick dual sword style that focuses on speed, the weakest of all styles, but has a greater dodge than the others, and also allows you to slow down time by performing a heavy attack after a combo finisher. The third is the Way of the Wind, or Gunslinger, a single sword fencing style that has a greater focus on magecraft and most effective against monsters. In this style, Iori's free hand has magic on the ready, allowing him to perform free attack spells with a heavy attack button. The fourth is Way of the Fire, or Swordmaster, a strong dual sword style with a focus on power. One of the strongest styles, but is also one of the slowest. It runs on a high risk, high reward basis, where the more damage you take, the stronger and quicker your attacks become. Now, there is one more style, and as much as I would like to talk about it, I think I'll let you find out on your own. Though you may have already been spoiled by the time you watch this, it's still pretty cool. Now, while all styles have their own strengths and weaknesses, Iori can overcome these temporarily through the Afterglow effect. Use a certain style long enough, or deal enough damage, and you gain that style's Afterglow, which provides a temporary buff that carries over to another style you switch over to. Earth grants super armor that prevents you from being interrupted, Water grants extra attack speed, Wind causes your attacks to be imbued with magic, causing enemies to be covered in flames, and Fire grants extra attack power. With your servant's context menu, you can perform various techniques specific to that servant by pressing the face buttons, and if the substitution gauge is full, you can switch over to them for a short amount of time. All servants have their own strengths and weaknesses, such as having faster attack speeds but shorter range, greater range but not being so great at close combat, or being slow but more powerful, though they all do have a similar set of techniques. You can try out each heroic spirit to see which one suits you, but they all kind of do the same job, dealing an assload of damage. Since Saber is Iori's main partner, they have the benefit of being able to equip different techniques. During combat, there will be a chance that Saber will have a green circle around them. This indicates a chance to activate a Link Strike, a dual tech that Iori and Saber perform together, and occasionally Saber may perform follow-ups to Iori's attacks. In this game, you can't just go ahead and wail on the enemy. The weak ones, yes, but not the ones you can lock onto. Combat comes down to reacting to how the enemy acts. If the enemy is blocking, either back away or you can use a spell to break their guard. If they're flashing red, use a heavy attack or a spell. If they whiff a charged attack, they'll be put into a green vulnerable state, allowing you to attack to fill your affinity gauge more than usual. You can also dodge their attacks by pressing the right trigger, and if done at the right time, you perform a perfect dodge to do a riposte, a counter that can do some serious damage. I was having trouble doing this at first, but I learned that it's easier to do if you bait the enemy into attacking to riposte. With enough practice, you can do it more reliably. Some enemies, mainly larger monsters and servants, have a shell gauge, indicated by a purple circle. This is pretty much their shield, which prevents Iori from doing any measurable damage. To damage and break it, either use a spell or attack with your servant to stun them. Stunning enemies is the way to go if you want to deal some massive damage. Once the shell is broken, you can take the enemy head on, or they'll regain their shell and force you to do it again. Outside of combat, you'll mainly be running around, visiting stores for food or items, and picking up shiny stuff off the ground. But there are other things you can do, like stopping fights or playing with cats and dogs. In each hub area, there are glowing red circles that initiates combat once you enter it. There are 2 sets of tasks that you can complete to earn money and items. Area commissions, objectives provided by specific NPCs, and local trials, area-specific tasks that can only be completed in said area. Outside the main story, there are side missions called digressions, which are usually missions given to you by rogue servants, and are also missions that can provide some extra context to the main story. Clearing these digressions, as well as the main story missions, increases Saber's memento rate, which improves Iori and Saber's bond, which allows them to perform combo attacks more often. Throughout the story, you'll also play a tactical minigame called Spirit Front battles, where Iori and Saber connect to Japan's ley lines and capture other spirit fronts to temporarily buff them and reach their destination. You can capture ley lines with servant icons over them to summon rogue servants to assist you, and later on you can split away from Saber to cover more space. On the spirit front, you can fight against the enemy, initiating a timed battle, where if you defeat them before time runs out, you get extra item drops, or you can just take over the space before them and the enemy will disappear. You can also use mystic codes to give Iori a quick boost, like stopping the enemy from moving or gaining more actions per turn. Essentially, this is just Fate Grand Order's Grow Front event, but less of a pain in the ass. In Iori's home, there are also things you can do there to help Iori and Saber on their journey. First is the workshop, which allows Iori to unlock perks, upgrade equipment, and build gems and command codes. There are also 2 mini games you can play. First is Blade Maintenance, which temporarily increases experience gain in battle. The other is Border Carving, which is a pretty great way to make some extra money and experience. Picking whichever style, hit the corresponding button in order within the time limit to create a statue. Do it well, and you've got a carving that you can sell to a certain shop. In terms of stats, there are 4 parameters. Attack, focusing on physical attack damage. Defense, which decreases the amount of damage taken. Magic attack, which increases the effectiveness of spells and elemental attacks, and technique, which increases the character's critical rate and how often they'll perform a perfect dodge. As Iori and Saber level up, their parameters increase, as well as the rogue servants with them. You can further upgrade these characters with their stat grid, which unlocks stat boosts and abilities through the use of skill points. If you run out of skill points, just pop a skill jewel and you should be good to go. Also, Iori's stats can be further increased by customizing his katanas, which can give him some extra bonuses, like increased damage against certain enemy types or increased loot drops. Overall, there is quite a bit to do in this game, although whether or not you'll be willing to do these things depends on how much of these kind of things appeal to you. Also, just something I want to mention. It's a bit strange that there's no strafing in this game. I mean, it's not really needed, but I just thought it's strange not to have it. Anyways, onto the other stuff. Visuals. It's a very pretty game, with a nice mix of anime and realistic aesthetics, and it does a great job in portraying the flashy nature of the Fate series. One thing that I thought was a really nice touch was that certain cutscenes were drawn in that very distinct Edo-era ukiyo-e style. The character portraits were also very nice to look at as well, and I have to give props to the game's illustrator, Rei Wataru, for making them look like pencil sketchings. Also, if you're familiar with Fate's characters' designs, you'll not only be able to notice their distinct looks, but will also be very familiar with who designed which characters, like Saber and Jean being designed by Takahashi Takeuchi, as seen by their very distinct Saber faces. Saber face, characters who look similar to the OG Saber, Artorio Pendragon. Also see Artorio face. One last thing that I should mention is the beautiful opening animation made by Cloverworks, who worked on the Fate Grand Order Babylonia anime, Watchery the Rock, and Spy X Family. Honestly, it just looks amazing. Though there are some spoilers in it, so you might want to skip it, but you'd be missing a pretty sick J-pop track. Speaking of tracks, audio. The sound design is pretty good. It's quite crisp, though it can get pretty cluttered during fights. The music mainly consists of traditional Japanese and orchestral music, with some rock here and there, as a given with Megaforce games, all of which are very pleasing to listen to. However, there aren't that many tracks in it, if the OST is any indicator, so you'll be hearing some songs on repeat quite a bit, but when a new song hits, it's usually staged for a big moment, and it pays off pretty well. Also, I did notice that the music will lower in volume sometimes, or just cut out. It sucks, but it doesn't happen often at least. The voice cast does a good job in the performance, a given considering that most of them are veterans in the industry, and some of these people pretty much have played these characters for many years now. Also, just as an observation, there is a moment late in the game where there are a bunch of stock sound effects playing. This isn't a criticism, but I did notice that some of the sounds that were playing, I have definitely heard somewhere else before. I can't really say where, but I know I've heard of them. I'm just grateful that they didn't put in that son of a bitch. So, having pretty much played this non-stop since it released, I must say that Fate Samurai Remnant is a fine action RPG. It is beginner friendly, as both an action game and a Fate entry, though if you do really want to get into the Fate series, you probably should start with Fate Stay Night. And while I do like it, there are some things that might turn people off from playing it. First is that it is quite slow to start. Why? Because there are a lot of dialogue and cutscenes. Essentially, it is a visual novel disguised as an action game. And as an anime game, people may not have a great tolerance with the writing. Personally, I didn't mind at all, but as the dude from a local video store said, a lot of gamers out there don't have much patience. Secondly, you mainly play as Iori, which can be a deal breaker to those who want to play as the servants. Honestly, I had a lot of fun with this gameplay. but hopefully the devs do consider adding in an option to play as the other characters in a somewhat larger manner. They do have DLC planned, and while we don't have much info on how that will play out, I'll remain somewhat hopeful that they'll put that feature in, but keep your expectations low. Finally, is it worth it to get it now? Well, it depends on how much of a die-hard Fate fan you are. And as an action game, there's a bit of depth, but it's not very deep. I mean, like I said earlier, when this game was announced, I immediately knew that I'd like it. But for some of you out there, if you're hesitant, wait for a discount, or wait for all the DLC to release. That's usually my general rule of thumb.